Maggid, sometimes spelled as Maggid, is a term used to describe two distinct concepts, the more common one defining a concrete person, and the other defining a celestial entity. The usual meaning is that of a traditional Eastern European Jewish religious itinerant preacher, skilled as a narrator of Torah and religious stories. A preacher of the more scholarly sort was called a darshan, and usually occupied the official position of rabbi. The title of Maggid Mesherim probably dates from the 16th century. The other meaning appears in the context of Jewish mysticism and describes a celestial entity, most commonly an angel, who manifests itself as a voice delivering mystical secrets to a Kabbalist, or sometimes speaking through the mouths of the chosen ones. There always have been two distinct classes of leaders in Israel, the scholar and rabbi, and the preacher or Maggid. That the popular prophet was sometimes called Maggid is maintained by those who translate Zechariah 9:12 by the Maggid repeats. Like the Greek sophists, the early Maggidim based their preaching on questions addressed to them by the multitude. Thus the Pesachita, the first collection of set speeches, usually begins with Yelamidanu Rabbanu. An excellent example is the Passover Haggadah, which is introduced by 4 questions. The reciter of the answer is called Maggid. When there were no questions, the Maggid chose a biblical text, which was called the Patisha. Popularity of the Maggid. The greater popularity of the Maggid as compared with the Darshan is instanced from Aggadic stories in the Talmud. The Talmud relates that the people left the lecture room of Chia, the Darshan, and flocked to hear Abahu, the Maggid. To appease the sensitive Chia, Abahu modestly declared, "We are like two merchants, one selling diamonds and the other selling trinkets, which are more in demand." Talmudist sages like Mir combined the functions of a darshan and a Maggid. When Isaac Napachar was requested by one in his audience to preach a popular Haggadah, and by another a halakhic discourse, he answered, "I am like the man who had 2 wives, one young and one old, and each wishing her husband to resemble her in appearance. The younger pulled out his grey hair while the older pulled out his black hair, with the result that he became entirely bald." Isaac thereupon delivered a lecture that embraced both Halakha and Agada. In the Gaonic period and the Middle Ages, Levi ben Sisi, his son Joshua, and others were at the head of a regular school of rabbinical Maggidim. Zerah was opposed to their methods of twisting and distorting the biblical verses to suit their momentary fancy. In Zerah's estimation, their works were of no more value than books on magic. In the Gaonic period and in the Middle Ages, the principal of the yeshiva, or the rabbi, delivered a lecture before each festival, giving instructions in the laws governing the days of the festival. The Maggid's function was to preach to the common people in the vernacular whenever occasion required, usually on Sabbath afternoon, basing his sermon on the Siddur of the week. The wandering, or traveling, Maggid then began to appear, and subsequently became a power in Jewry. His mission was to preach morality, to awaken the dormant spirit of Judaism, and to keep alive the messianic hope in the hearts of the people. The Maggidim's deliverances were generally lacking in literary merit, and were composed largely of current phrases, old quotations, and biblical interpretations which were designed merely for temporary effect. Therefore none of the sermons which were delivered by them have been preserved. Maggidism reached a period of high literary activity in the 16th century. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492 revealed a master Maggid in Isaac Abravanel. His homiletic commentary on the Bible became an inexhaustible source of suggestion for future Maggidim. In his method of explaining every chapter, preceded by a number of questions, he followed the early Maggidim and sophists. His long argumentations in an easy and fluent style were admirably suited to the purposes of a Maggid. Moses Alshech, a Maggidic scholar, was one of a community of great Jewish spiritual figures who shaped Jewish thought in the 16th century town of Safed in the Galilee. Others in his circle included the compiler of the Shulchan Aruch Code, Joseph Caro, and the leading Kabbalists Moses Cordovero and Isaac Luria. In the mystical environment of this community, the Alshech preached every Sabbath before large audiences. Isaac Luria attended his expositions, which included Kabbalistic aspects. In his classic biblical commentaries he followed closely the method of Abravanel. Alshech also became an authority for the Maggidim, who quoted him frequently. Relation to Messianic fervor. The persecutions of the Jews brought forth a number of Maggidim who endeavored to excite the Messianic hope as a balm to the troubled and oppressed Jewry. The new articulation and cosmic doctrines of redemption in Kabbalah, taught by Isaac Luria in the 16th century, inspired a new mystical awareness and focus on messianism. Messianic messengers and potential candidates sought to advance the messianic quest in Judaism. Asher Lemlein preached in Germany and Austria, announcing the coming of the Messiah in 1502, and found credence everywhere. Solomon Molko preached, without declaring the date of the Advent, in both Italy and Turkey, and as a result was burned at the stake in Mantua in 1533. R. Hoschel of Krakow delighted in the elucidation of difficult passages in the Midrash known as the Midrash Peli. R. H. Urson's biography of Hoschel, in his Chanikat HaTorah, gives a collection of 227 sayings, gathered from 227 books by various writers, mostly Hoschel's pupils. These sayings became current among the Maggidim, who repeated them on every occasion. Some Maggidim copied his methods and even created a pseudo-Midrash Peli for the purpose of explaining the original ingeniously in the manner initiated by R. Hoschel. Their Pearl Hefter is considered the first Maggid of the Sabbatian Abraham Rovigo in Modena. Pearl Hefter restored the Sabbatian theology after the death of the pseudo-Messiah, and advocate of mystical heresy, Sabbater Zevi. Motivation and admonishment. Elijah B. Solomon Abraham of Smyrna, in the beginning of the 18th century, published his Shabbat Musar, which he divided into 52 chapters, one for each week. This book caused him to be known as the Torah Maggid. He preached moral and religious conduct as a safeguard against the terrible punishments of the Day of Judgment. Dante could not picture the horrors of hell and the punishments awaiting the wicked more minutely than did the author of the Shabbat Musar. It established a new fire and brimstone school of Maggidim. Musar is a thread in traditional Jewish thought that seeks ethical inspiration, integrity or admonishment to motivate religious devotion. Classic texts of ethical guidance from the Middle Ages articulate spiritual and psychological levels to righteousness. The later 19th century Musar movement sought to incorporate spiritual introspection and self-analysis into the scholarly yeshiva curriculum. The Musar movement seeks to inspire spiritual advancement by discovering personal integrity and revealing the unworthiness of material temptations. Its spirituality does not always describe rewards and punishments, but admonishment can be a factor. It can draw ethical lessons from Jewish mysticism, but is often compared and contrasted with the mystical paths to inspiration of Kabbalistic Vekus, and the popularization of mystical fervor in Hasidism. Typically, Hasidism avoids rebuke of punishments, replacing it with shame and remorse from nullification of self-awareness before the omnipresent divine presence that awakens joy. Judah Rosanus of Constantinople, in his Parashat Rakim, combines the Darshan with the Maggid. He adopted a new method of harmonizing the acts of biblical personages with the legal views of Talmudist scholars. For instance, Pharaoh, in refusing to release Israel from bondage, acted according to the contention of Abba, while Moses insisted on Israel's release in accordance with the decision of Rabbah. This far-fetched pilpulism had many followers, some of whom asserted that Ahasuerus concurred in the decision of Maimonides. and that Vashti coincided with the opinion of Rabad, the Dubna Maggid. Jacob Kranz of Dubna, the Dubna Maggid, author of Ol Yarob, adopted the Midrash's method of explaining by parables in the incidents of daily life, such as the relations between the man of the city and the Yeshubnik, between the bride, the bridegroom, and the Mechutanim, and compared their relations to those between Israel and God. He drew also moral lessons from the Arabian Nights, and from other secular stories in illustrating explanations of a midrash or a biblical text. Moses Mendelssohn named Kranz the Jewish Aesop. His most famous parable is about how he finds appropriate parables. Walking in the woods, a man sees many trees with targets drawn on them, each target with an arrow in the center, and a little boy with a bow. The little boy acknowledges that he had shot all the arrows. When further questioned, he answers, "First I shoot the arrow, then I draw the target." Kranz's pupil Abraham Dov Bar-Flam edited and published the Dubna Maggid's writings, and a host of other Maggidim adopted this method. In the same period there were Jacob Israel of Kremnitz, author of Shabbat Mi Yisrael, a commentary on the Psalms, Judah Loetel of Slonim, author of Afik Yehuda, sermons, Chaim Abraham Katz of Mohif, author of Milcham Alvi Shalom, Ezekiel Feiwel of Debrecen, author of Toledot Adam, a Maggid in Wilna. In modern times, a descendant of the Dubna Maggid, Moshe Crank wrote down several parables of his, along with modern interpretations, in a book about business and Jewish stories, The Hasidic Master's Guide to Management. Philosophical Maggidim. The most celebrated Maggid during the 19th century was Moses Isaac ben Noah Darshan, the Kelma Maggid. He was among the Terah Maggidim of the Shabbat Musar school and preached to crowded synagogues for over 50 years in almost every city of Russian Poland. Another prominent Maggid was Chaim Zedek, known as the Rumsheshka. The philosophical Maggid is one who preached from Aramas, Ikdate, and Batchias, Chobot ha-Lebabot. Enoch Sundal Luria, the author of Kenefrenanum, on Pirk Shira, was a noted philosophical Maggid. Meir Leibush Malbim, in his voluminous commentaries on the Bible, followed to some extent Abravanel and Alshech, and his conclusions are pointed and logical. Malbim's commentaries are considered to offer the best material for the use of Maggidim. From the Terah, or Musar, Maggid developed the penitential Maggid, who, especially during the month of Elul in the 10 days of penitence between New Year's Day and Yom Kippur, urged the wicked to repent of their sins and seek God's forgiveness. One of these penitential preachers was Jacob Joseph, chief rabbi of the Russian Jews in New York, formerly Maggid of Wilna, and a student of the Musar movement. In the middle of his preaching he would pause to recite with the people the Shema Kolinu and the Ashemnu, raising the audience to a high pitch of religious emotion. The Maggid usually ended his preaching with the words, Yubal Azion Gol, etc. Some of the wandering Maggidim acted also as Meshalakim, the yeshivot in Russia and the charitable institutions of Jerusalem, especially the Vaad HaKelili, sent abroad Meshalak Maggidim. The resident Maggid who preached at different synagogues in one city was called the Stat Maggid, as in Wilna and other large cities in Russia. The modern, or Maskell, Maggid was called Volksredner, and closely followed the German Prediger in his method of preaching. Zabiha Steinau was the first of the modern type of Maggid, which soon developed into that of the national, or Zionistic, Maggid. Tzvi Hirsch-Masliansky and Joseph Zeff, both of New York, were representatives of the latter class. See Homiletics. Hasidic Maggidim. The founder of the Hasidic movement, Israel ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov, awakened a new stage and revival in Jewish mysticism. Hasidic philosophy internalized the abstract theological system of the earlier Kabbalah, by relating it to man's inner psychological awareness. This saw divine omnipresence in everything, and brought this into personal vacuus through joyful fervor in daily life. The Baal Shem Tov opposed the admonishing methods of the Musar Maggidim, which criticized and demoralized, as well as motivated, the community. His mysticism saw the inner holiness of each person. He would often illustrate to his disciples the preciousness in God's eyes of the simple sincerity of the unlearned Jewish folk. In the biographical hagiography of stories about the Baal Shem Tov, his encounters and conversions of admonishing preachers are recounted, as well as his encounters with the isolated, ascetic scholars, whose practices he also opposed. His personal model of the Hasidic master Rebbe was passed to the subsequent Hasidic masters in the new Hasidic interpretation of the Tzaddik, who channels divine blessing to the world. The microcosmic messianic redemption offered by a Hasidic Rebbe gave a new form of teacher and leader to the Jewish community, combining public mystic and redeemer, along with the traditional notions of darshan and Maggid. Some Hasidic leaders are known with the name of Maggid, sometimes gained from before their adherence to Hasidism. The continual regard of this title to them indicates a new interpretation of the traditional notion of a Maggid, incorporated into the Hasidic role of Rebbe. The mystical revival of Hasidism elevated hagiographic storytelling about the masters to a new degree in Judaism, reflecting the importance of the mystical adherence to a Tzaddik. The popular titles of each master therefore reflect personal endearment and reverence. Rabbi Dovber of Mezrich is known as the Maggid of Mezrich after being the Maggid of the town of Rovna. After initially being opposed to the Baal Shem Tov's new ideas, he became a disciple and member of the Baal Shem Tov's close inner circle. After the death of his master, the disciples appointed Dovber to become his successor, leading the new Hasidic movement in the early years of its establishment. Rabbi Dovber, the Maggid of Mezrich or Great Maggid, is regarded as the first exponent of the philosophical system within the Baal Shem Tov's new teachings and doctrines, and one of its most important propagators. He became the architect of the new movement, devoting his attention to developing an academy of leading scholars and future leaders to spread Hasidism across each of the regions of Eastern Europe after his death. His teachings appear in the volume Maggid Dever Avliakov. His inner circle of disciples included Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk, Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, Rabbi Levi Yitzchok of Berdichev, Rabbi Aharon of Karlin, Rabbi Menahem Mendel of Vitebsk, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Notable Maggidim: Hillel Noah Maggid, Lithuanian genealogist and historian, a descendant of the family of Solwal. See also Abba Glusk Lexika. Dovber of Mezrich, the propagator of the early Hasidic movement. Moses Isaac of Chelm, Der Kelmer Maggid. Zev Wolf of Zabaraj and Zalokzo. Sholem Schwadron, the Maggid of Jerusalem. Tzvi Hirsch Masliansky, American preacher. The Koznitzer Maggid. Yisrael Hopstein, the Maggid of Koznitz, and one of the three patriarchs of Polish Hasidism.